I'm going to give you a rundown of the critical mistakes that people make when starting their LLCs. I'm an entertainment attorney of 9 years. I've done this a lot. I've started my own businesses and I've helped numerous people over many years do the same. So the first critical mistake that entrepreneurs and business owners make is that they don't get an EIN. After you register your limited liability company, your LLC, you gotta go and get an EIN, which acts as kind of the tax number for the company. The reason why we care about this is because you have to use it on things like different tax forms, but in particular when it comes to opening a bank account. Now, if you are opening a bank account for the business, which you absolutely have to do, it should be register the LLC, get your EIN, and open a business bank account. So if you don't open the business bank account, what happens is that now you are really exposing yourself to potential issues down the road because, someone might sue you and you'll say, well, you sued my LLC. The LLC protects me individually, so you can't get to any of my personal assets. Then that person, through what's called the discovery phase of the litigation, they can go in and they'll go, okay, I see you don't have an EIN. I see you never got a business bank account. And so then they can potentially make the argument that you kind of have a shell corporation. If that's the case, then through piercing the corporate veil, we can basically get to you personally. This is how we get to your personal accounts, your car, your house, and that's really not good for you. So it's extremely important for many reasons, but not getting your EIN is a huge mistake, and it's something that you absolutely need to do. How do you do it, you ask? Well, you just go to irs.gov. For me, I just Google EIN IRS, and it'll bring up the exact link that you need to go through. It takes less than 10 minutes. They just need things like your name and business name and just some few basic details, and then you get it right away electronically. So don't miss this incredibly important step. Next, when it comes to the critical mistakes with LLCs, the next one is just going to be not knowing the different tax forms and what to put on them. So where I want to start with this is that if it's just you and you started your LLC, typically, if you are filling out, let's say, bank information, right? You started an online account, they want you to connect your bank, and then they go, we need you to fill out the tax forms. So it's typically going to be like a W-9 or a W-2, but it's always the same information. What's the name of the business? So you put the LLC name, and then it'll say, what is the entity type? So when you see the entity type, you'll see things like corporation, C Corp, S Corp, and it might say single member LLC or LLC, and it will usually say something like sole proprietor. The actual definition of a sole proprietorship is that you're still unincorporated. So if I'm like, hey, I'm starting a cupcake company and I start using a name, Krystle's Cupcakes, and I never actually register a LLC, then I'm just a sole proprietor. But I still am, doing business as, I'm still pretending to kind of be a company. So I would use a sole proprietor in that instance. What you typically want to put, if you are just the person owning the company, is if it has single member LLC, put single member LLC. It's just you. If obviously there's more than one of you in the LLC, then you just put a limited liability company, and that's it. So then the other thing you need to think about is when it comes to having your taxes at the end of the year. I'm not an accountant, so anything that I say in here in regards to accounting and financial stuff, I'm not your accountant. Please get your own separate counsel, but I've just done this a lot of times, and so I've just kind of seen what my clients have done, and I know what I've done. So when you file your taxes at the end of the year, when you have a limited liability company, if it's just you, then you are essentially having a pass-through, and you don't have to do like a separate filing for the business, which is great news. So when you file, you'll see that on your federal tax form, there's something called Schedule C. Schedule C is where it's going to say, hey, where did you get, the money from? What was it for? And so you just disclose where you got all your money, and then you pay taxes on that income, right? So Schedule C is only for one person. If you are a sole proprietor or if you have a single member LLC. So then the next question, well, what if you have multiple members? So that form is a 1065. And so all you need to know is you'll have the 1065 for the partnership, and then what you generate are called K1s, right? So you generate a K1, and so if John and me, we're partners, we file our 1065, and then we each are going to get K1s from the business, and that is our separate income. So then on our personal tax return for our Schedule Cs, I'll say, I made $1 million this year, you made a million this year, wasn't that great of a year, we'll do better next. And you note it on Schedule C. So that's number 2 when it comes to critical mistakes. It's just putting in the wrong information because you're like, I have an LLC, I don't know what to put. So usually the confusion happens between the sole proprietorship and then the single member LLC. So at least now you know the distinction, but then my PS and caveat on that is sometimes they don't give you enough options. So the way that they've set up the form is kind of wonky. So we'll say either your corporation or your sole proprietorship. So sometimes you have to make a judgment call on what fits best for what you're doing, but at least now you know the distinction. Next on our list of the critical mistakes that happen before you start an LLC and even after you start the LLC. Number 3, you never get an operating agreement. When we say, what's the contract for the company? Who runs the company? If you have partners, who gets to make decisions, who's getting distributions, who's getting paid from the entity, all those things come up. And if you don't have an actual written contract, then what you have is a verbal agreement. If you have a verbal agreement, then a lot of problems can happen. So it's very important that you get an operating agreement into place, including if it's just you. So if you get your contract for the company into place before anyone else ever joins you or becomes partners, then you've already set the rules for the company into place. So it's really good to do it, and it is required in some states. It depends on where you live, but some states do require that you actually have an operating agreement with your LLC. So either way, please make sure get an operating agreement and do it right away. Now, let's talk about your good standing. So after you file and you set up the LLC and you're rocking and you're rolling and you're making your millions, that's great. You have your business bank account, you're filing your taxes, you're filling in the tax forms, right? I'm so proud of you. Well, let's talk about what happens if you default on the LLC. How do you maintain the LLC's good standing, which is what it's typically called? Well, the answer is it depends on where you live. So in some states, like for example in California, they want you to pay some money every year just for having the LLC. So you want to make sure you know what is specific to your particular state. So there might be fees, there might be some kind of annual report that you need to file. And some states are great. Like for example, the state of Arizona, you don't have to file anything annually. So after you register and you get set up, you just kind of exist in perpetuity until you decide to close down shop. So just make sure you know if there's any kind of special requirements in your particular state, because what happens if you don't pay a fee, you don't file an annual report, then sometimes the state can essentially just shut you down, or they will ding you, you'll get fees. So if you've gone through the effort to set up your LLC and get the bank account and get your operating agreement and do all the things, make sure you are, in fact, staying on top of it every year if that is required in your state. And then when it comes to these critical mistakes of limited liability companies, please make sure that your statutory agent information is up to date. Each state is different, but typically you set up your company through the Secretary of State. All right, so through the Secretary of State, you will say, here's all the things, here's who owns it, and then here's the statutory agent. The statutory agent is the person or company that is designated to accept legal service if ever there are legal papers. So it's the publicly disclosed name and address of the person who's going to accept things like lawsuits, for example. So what can happen is that, if you're like, oh, I'll just do it, or I will use my mom's address, right? Because maybe you're living with mom. Early in the business, okay? And, you move. So you need to make sure you actually update the statutory agent information just to make sure that you're actually receiving important papers and lawsuits and all the things that could potentially be coming at you. So if you are looking for some help, including in setting up your LLC, including in getting an operating agreement, please make sure that you contact a law firm. I do this all day long. I'm happy to help you, but even if it's not me, please go to someone. Please get some help. My firm is Delgado Entertainment Law. Please like this video if you found it helpful, and I'll see you on the next one.